Are you really feeding your bee colonies the best possible pollen substitute, or just whatever happens to be available at the store? What if I told you that with a few simple natural ingredients, some of which many come straight from your own environment, you could dramatically improve your colony's strength, resilience, and even their behavior? In this video, I show you why commercial mixes are often not the best solution, and I introduce our own homemade pollen and protein substitute, a formula that has brought clear, measurable improvements in our apiary. If you want to understand the real difference between mass-produced feed and a thoughtfully designed natural alternative, stay with me until the end of the video. Let's start with the fundamentals, because this is where everything is decided. What bees eat directly determines the strength of the colony, its development and its long-term viability. Pollen, or more precisely pollen substitution, is not a minor supplement. It is one of the most critical nutrition sources for bees. Without protein, there is no brood rearing, no strong nurse bee population, and no balanced colony. Nurse bees produce royal jelly from pollen and from pollen and protein substitute feeds. This is the foundation of everything: brood development, bee longevity, and ultimately the overall performance of the colony. If nutrition is weaker or poor quality at this point, the consequences follow the colony for weeks and often for months. Many beekeepers believe that commercial pollen substitutes are more or less the same, and that if a product is sold in a beekeeping supply store, it must be good. In reality, the situation is far more complex. Most commercially available mixes are mass-produced products. They are not tailored to your apiary, not adapted to your local environmental conditions, and not aligned with your specific goals. They are often built on compromises, cheaper ingredients, simplified formulations, and solutions that look good on paper but perform poorly in real-world conditions. In many cases, bees themselves do not respond well to these mixes. Feed intake is weak, colony development is slow, the digestive system is under unnecessary strain, or the protein source used are poorly utilized by the bees. These problems are not always obvious right away, but over time they clearly show up in the condition and performance of the colonies. This is why the real question is not whether we feed pollen substitute, but what we feed and how we feed it. A well-designed pollen and protein substitute passed on natural principles can genuinely support bee colonies, instead of simply giving them something to consume. In this video, I will show you how to move beyond the limitations of commercial mixes and how to apply an approach that aligns far better with the real needs of bees. An approach based not on marketing terms, but on proven practical experience. This is the foundation on which everything else will be built. Once you understand this, you will clearly see why it is worth rethinking pollen substitution, and why this shift can create real, measurable improvements in your apiary. We start making our own bee feed quite a long time ago, but for a short period of about 2 years we fed our bees with commercially available pollen substitute patties, especially during spring build-up and autumn preparation. At the time, I believed we had reached a point where well-developed and purpose-suitable feed was available on the market, and it also seemed like the simplest solution. You open the hive, place the patty inside, close it up, and move on to the next apiary location. As time went on and our beekeeping operation continued to grow, we began notice more and more contradictions and problems with these commercial patties. The colonies appeared to develop reasonably well at first, but over the long term they did not progress in the way we expected or wanted. The same product, fed in the same way, produced completely different results as conditions change. We increasingly experienced issues where the patties softened in warm weather and ended up running down to the bottom of the hive, or they hardened, molded, and dried out. All of this led to weaker population growing than expected, and the feed became more of a problem than a support. That raised an important question for us. If these patties are truly as good as marketing materials claim, why do they perform so unpredictably? The answer was not simple, but in the end, we decided to abandon the most convenient option and return to producing our own feed for our bees. Feed that does not run to the bottom of the hive, does not mold, and does not dry out. And most importantly, feed that bees willingly consume while maintaining and even improving our production results. We went back into development mode, and by surpassing commercial patties, we achieved an additional 20 to 30% improvement compared to them. Most commercial patties are produced using standardized recipe designed for mass use, aiming to deliver general and therefore average results. But every apiary is different, every spring is different, and every location is different. The surrounding vegetation varies, as does the microclimate, humidity, temperature, and timing. A colony that is actively building up does not have the same needs as an overwintered unit or a split made during summer. Commercial products usually do not adapt to these subtle differences. They are like uniform, but bees are not uniform. Beekeepers are not uniform either. Developing colonies require completely different nutrition than a pollen-producing colonies. In our apiary, it often happened that patties were simply not consumed. Sometimes they dried out and hardened. Other times they melted or even fermented inside the hive. In some locations, natural pollen was so abundant that the patty remained untouched. And if its consistency was not ideal, it caused problems because heat and elevated humidity made it float down to the bottom of the hive. In other cases, the bees did consume the patty, but the colony still did not enter the level of development we expected when the feed disappeared from the hive. That was because instead of stimulating growth and development, the bees stored it in the cells rather than using it. It became increasingly clear to us that the problem was not only about dosing, but also about the fact that these products were simply not good enough. They were not made from the right ingredients. Later on, we also observed that their composition was not designed to support explosive colony growth, but rather slow, limited development, and only if temperature stayed within a very narrow range, roughly above 12 degrees and below 25 degrees Celsius. Outside of that window, the purchased patties were simply not reliable or effective. That was one of the key reasons we decided to go our own way. We began carefully observing the natural pollen sources available at our different apiary locations, mapping seasonal shortage, and closely monitoring how colonies reacted to different types of stimulation. We started experimenting, at first with small adjustments, different pollen substitute ratios, new ingredients, different textures. Later, we moved toward targeted formulas, creating patties specifically tailored to a given location, season, and the results we wanted from the colonies. We tracked which recipe the bees consumed more readily, how many days it took for brood rearing to start, and when the first fully kept brood frames appeared. Based on these observations, step by step, we are able to formulate increasingly effective patties. We work with different crude protein levels, from below to 25% all the way up to 50%. We adjusted energy density, oil content, flavor components, and closely observed how bees of different ages responded. We have been producing patties since 2011, so there is a real experience behind this. After more than 45 tons of produced patties, I can confidently say that the patties used within our combined stimulation strategies have delivered outstanding results for our apiary. Perhaps the most important lesson we learn is that the bees do not need more, they need better. A well-timed, location-specific patty is worth far more than any branded, universal product. One more thing also become very clear. Bees are sensitive to quality. Not all protein sources are the same for them. Rations matter. Digestibility matters. Taste matters. Everything matters. The transition was not instantaneous. We had to learn not only how to make patties, which we already know fairly well, but how to build a proper feeding strategy. As the first results appeared, larger and more evenly distributed brood areas, more uniform population growth, more stable colony development, and better yields, we knew we were on the right path. Today, your own stimulation system is no longer just a supplementary tool. It has become one of the most important resources driving the development of our beekeeping operation. We are not simply stimulating, we are guiding. And in this process, knowledge, attention, and experience are worth far more than any package solution. Our own pollen substitute patty was not created overnight. It is the result of months and years of experimentation, observation, and constant redesign. Our goal was to develop a feed formula that not only supports bee development but also adapts to local conditions and can be produced by any beekeeper on their own without artificial additives. Mixing always starts with the base. We select natural ingredients that are easily available in our region and that already contains nutrients beneficial for bees on their own. Our protein source mainly include brewer's yeast powder, soy flour, egg white powder or whole eggs, and natural pollen. These are balanced in a way that the finished patty has a crude protein content of roughly 33 to 36%. This is the range where we observed the most positive effects, especially in brood stimulation and in the development of the hypopharyngeal glands. In the past, we kept protein levels around 10 to 14%, but we realized that much better results were possible, so we gradually increased it. Part of our carbohydrates source comes from invert syrup, corn syrup, which we add in a specific order. This allows us to mix in the most sensitive components at low temperatures, preserving the activity of yeast and enzymes. The supply fat-soluble vitamins and essential fatty acids. We use small amounts of rapeseed oil or flaxseed oil. These are not added in rigid ratios, rather slightly more than less, so the texture of the patty is not compromised. In some cases, we also add dried and finely ground pollen to provide a broader and a higher quality nutrient profile for the bees. In addition, we include very small amounts of specific minerals such as calcium, zinc, and magnesium, which support enzyme function and immune response. During mixing, the most important factor is consistency. The patty must be moldable but not too dry. A well-made patty does not crumble, does not run, and does not deteriorate in the hive after just a few days or weeks. Experience shows that if bees begin consuming in within 24 hours, acceptance and utilization will be good. If they ignore it for days, the texture or the formulation is flawed. We still have patties in storage that were mixed 10 years ago, and their consistency is exactly the same as it was back then. They have not hardened and show no signs of degradation. We also pay close attention to which ingredients support bees at different life stages, because nutrition needs change depending on the role and age of bees within the colony. Young worker bees, for example, respond much better to yeast powder and natural pollen, while a laying queen and older workers require a more balanced protein, fat and carbohydrates ratio. That is why we always adjust the patty composition to the given period. In spring, we use a more stimulating, protein-rich mix, while in late autumn, we traditionally applied a more energy-focused but less activating formula to avoid triggering unnecessarily brood rearing after the end of autumn preparation. However, in recent years, I have increasingly seen that this doesn't not actually cause problems, because colony development depends on several factors at the same time. And if the other conditions are missing, the colony will not raise brood anyway. Because of this, in the last few years, I have been using the same patty that we prepare for exploding spring build-up. The difference today is mainly that the first two patties in the spring and the last two in autumn, including the patties placed for wintering, also contain treatments. When sourcing ingredients, the biggest challenge is always quality. For yeast powder, we only use fresh material with not musty smell. For soy flour, we exclusively use non-GMO resources that are also suitable for human consumption. Oils are sourced directly from trusted producers, and every batch is tested in small quantities before being used in larger mixes. Pollen sourcing is a separate story altogether. We only use pollen from our own production, where we know the exact collection areas and handling process in order to minimize the risk of contamination. Even from your own apiary, pollen is only used when everything is perfectly in order and there is no even a suspicion of infection. Experience shows that a truly good patty is not good because it is made from expensive ingredients, but because it is well coordinated, with every component serving a specific purpose in colony development. When this balance is achieved, bees respond immediately. Brood rearing gains momentum, the number of foragers increases, and the overall activity of the colonies rises noticeably. These are not accidental results, but the outcome of deliberate work built on observation, experience, and careful decision making. Many people think that the purpose of a pollen substitute patty is simply to put something into the hive when there is no natural pollen available, or when no other stimulation is being applied. But anyone who has seen the difference after using a well-designed patty made from natural ingredients know that this is about much more than that. The effect is not visible only in brood rearing. It shows up in the overall vitality of the entire colony. Once we started using our own mix, the observation followed quickly. Colonies became stronger, frames showed denser and more uniform caped brood without patchy patterns, and the queen laying rhythm started sooner and more decisively. Around 15 to 17 days after feeding, the difference was already clearly visible compared to colonies that received commercial patties or no supplementation at all. On a very important point that I want to emphasize is that stimulation with patties requires time. It is physically impossible to see real results within 3 to 5 days because the colony needs time to respond. In my experience, visible results usually begin to appear after about day 15. What was perhaps even more surprising was that fewer diseases started to appear in the colonies. Nosema infection declined. Spring dysentery symptoms practically disappeared. And instead of the usual summer weakening, colonies continued to develop steadily, even during periods when nectar flow stopped and decline used to begin. These changes are not accidental. A well-balanced natural feed supports the immune system, helps stabilize gut flora, and provides the protein and micronutrients background that makes bees more resilient, not only against infection, but against stress as well. These positive effects also have another consequences that is often less visible, but extremely important: economic performance. When a colony develops faster, it reaches optimal foraging strength earlier. When fewer queens are lost, replacement are needed less often. When disease pressure is low, there is no lost production. And when patties are actually consumed, the beekeeper's money does not rot on the bottom of the hive. Taken together, this is no longer about grams, but about kilograms, about completely different level of profitability. Still, many beekeepers hesitate when it comes to homemade mixing. They say it is complicated, unpredictable, or that we cannot really know what bees need. But this is not guesswork. The formula we work with is not a gamble mixed together in a garage. It is built on scientific foundations, experimental results, histological observation, and nutritional research. The protein level around 35% was not invented by us. Research has shown that this is where colonies perform best without being overloaded. Of course, we combine this with our own observations and experience, but none of this came out of thin air. A natural pollen substitute patty that can be made at home does not mean giving up professionalism. On the contrary, it means taking control. It means not blindly trusting a label or a brand name, but deciding what we give our bees based on our own experience, the behavior of our own colonies, and proven scientific results. And bees will always show us very clearly whether we are on the right path or not. If you have made it this far in the video, then you're probably not the kind of beekeeper who is satisfied with the bare minimum. Anyone who takes beekeeping development seriously will sooner or later realize that nutrition is not a side topic or an optional add-on, but one of the core pillars. And while we have shared your own path here, this is only a beginning. The goal is not for everyone to copy your recipe word for word, but for each beekeeper to start moving in their own direction, adapted to their own bees, their own location, and their own goals. Every region is different, every season is different, and every beekeeping system is different. You may have different dominant pollen sources or a different rhythm to your nectar flows. That is why I encourage you to experiment with different ratios, observe how your colonies respond, and build your own formula. Whether you start from our experience or follow a completely different path. What matters most is that decisions are made consciously, not out of habit, but based on observation and clear intent. If you are interested in going deeper into the science of bee nutrition, or if you want to learn more about sustainable and precision based beekeeping, it is worth exploring the available scientific resources, professional materials, or joining communities where beekeepers support and build each other instead of criticizing one another. You can find the link to the community in the video description and in the pinned comment. On this channel, I regularly share content like this, and I am planning to expand knowledge sharing through online materials and workshops that will be available within the community. And finally, do not be just a viewer, be a participant. If you have tried your own mixed patties, if you have seen change in your colonies, developments, or if you have questions, write them down. Your story and your observations can help others as well. This is how a community is built, where beekeeping is not just routine, but an opportunity for growth, where the hive does not only produce honey, but also teaches us. I am Oscar and warmly invite you to join to the community. I will see you there.